In the golden heart of Nigeria, where the wind carried the scent of red dust and ripe mangoes, stood the mighty kingdom of Abanji. The afternoon sun glowed gently across its open fields, painting the land in shades of amber and bronze. Tall palm trees swayed lazily beside the great palace walls, and the air was filled with laughter, the sound of children chasing goats, of women pounding yam in rhythm, and of royal guards singing songs of loyalty as they marched across the courtyard. In the middle of this harmony ruled King Adwale, a man of courage, wisdom, and kindness. His rule was fair, his justice clear, and his people lived in peace. But among all his blessings, there was one he cherished most, his only son, Prince Kofi, just 13 years old. The prince had a spirit as bright as the midday sun and a heart as pure as river water. Wherever he went, smiles followed. The people loved him not just as a future king, but as the very soul of Abanji itself. Prince Kofi was not raised in luxury alone. King Adwale believed that a ruler must first understand his people. Every morning, under the blazing African sun, Kofi would walk among farmers, listen to elders, and play with children his own age. He laughed freely, learned eagerly, and treated even servants with respect. And among those servants, there was one man who held a special place in the young prince's heart, Junad, the stable keeper. Junad was humble and quiet, a man whose hands carried the scent of horses and leather, but whose eyes carried the calm wisdom of the savannah. He had served the royal family for years, teaching the prince how to ride, how to care for animals, and, more importantly, how to listen before he spoke. Kofi often said that Junad was like a second father, and though Junad never said much, his gentle smile said everything. Their bond was one of trust, the kind that only grows from shared sun, sweat, and laughter. But beyond the borders of Abanji, far across the red hills, burned another kingdom, Zoruba, ruled by King Makori. Where Adwale was kind, Makori was cruel. His soldiers were feared, his taxes harsh, and his heart heavy with envy. For years, Zoruba had tried to conquer Abanji's rich lands and failed. Every defeat deepened Makori's hatred for Adwale, until it became a fire that refused to die. The old men of Zoruba whispered that Makori no longer sought gold or land, he wanted to break the pride of Abanji by striking at its heart. He wanted to make King Adwale kneel. And what better way to do that than to steal the joy of his life, the young prince himself? Makori began to plan quietly, his anger growing under the same bright African sun that warmed Abanji's peace. One bright afternoon, when the cicadas hummed in the trees and the horizon shimmered with heat, Prince Kofi asked his father's permission to visit the western meadows, a wide field of wildflowers where he often rode horses with Junad. The king smiled, unaware that danger lurked beyond the hills. "Go, my son," he said warmly. "Take your guards, and remember, the people's eyes are your mirror." With that, Kofi mounted his brown horse, Junad walking beside him, and a few royal guards following behind. The sky was clear, the air smelled of dust and sweetness, and laughter echoed as the group trotted down the winding path. For a while, everything was perfect, the golden grass, the singing birds, the prince's carefree joy. No one imagined that the day would end with tears. As they reached the meadow, Junad began preparing the horses for rest when suddenly, the wind shifted. The laughter stopped. From behind the acacia trees, a dozen horsemen burst into view, armored men carrying Zoruba's red insignia. They charged forward, raising clouds of dust that darkened the sun. The Abanji guards drew their spears, shouting in alarm, but the attack was too swift. The earth trembled under galloping hooves, and in moments, chaos erupted. Junad tried to protect the prince, pulling him toward the horses, but a blow to his shoulder threw him to the ground. The prince screamed as strong arms grabbed him, dragging him away. "Junad," he cried, but his voice was lost in the thunder of hooves. Within moments, the meadow that once sang with laughter now echoed only with the cries of the wounded and the fading sound of retreating horses. The red dust rose high in the air, swallowing everything in its path, and when it settled, the prince was gone. By the time news reached the palace, the afternoon sun had begun to dip toward the west. The royal drums stopped. Women wailed in the courtyards, and the king's heart broke in silence. He stood at the palace gate, staring into the horizon where his son had vanished, his golden robes fluttering in the dry wind. Generals and guards knelt before him, trembling. "My king," they said, "the prince has been taken, by Zoruba." For a long moment, King Adwale said nothing. His voice, when it came, was deep and full of pain. "Then the son of a Banji has been stolen." He turned away, his hands trembling, his crown slipping slightly as if the weight of his sorrow had bent it. The palace that once glowed with life now felt hollow, like a shell without its pearl. In the days that followed, a Banji mourned as the sun kept shining, bright, almost cruel in its beauty. The people gathered in the square, praying for the prince's safety. Messengers were sent to the borders, but none returned with good news. Inside the palace, King Adwale barely spoke. Every afternoon he sat beneath the shade of the royal fig tree, eyes fixed on the road that led west. Junad, wounded but alive, blamed himself for the loss. He could still hear the prince's cries in his dreams, could still feel the dust and fear on his skin. But as he watched his king silently suffer, something began to stir inside him, a quiet fire, fierce and unyielding. He knew the guards would not go after the prince, they feared Zoruba's wrath. But Junad had no fear left, only duty. He looked toward the horizon where the sunlight burned red over the plains and whispered to himself, "If I must walk across fire to bring him home, then let the fire begin." The morning after the prince's kidnapping arrived like a cruel joke. The sun shone as brilliantly as ever, casting gold on the palace roofs, yet the air felt heavy with grief. The drums that once beat with pride were silent, and the singers who used to fill the courtyards with melodies now whispered prayers instead. King Adwale sat in his open throne hall, surrounded by the symbols of power that suddenly meant nothing. His royal crown rested beside him, untouched. His advisors and generals knelt at a distance, afraid to speak. The king's eyes were fixed on the horizon beyond the palace gates, as if he could still see his son's shadow riding away into the fields. When finally he spoke, his voice broke the stillness like thunder rolling over dry land. "My son," he said slowly, "my boy, my only light, taken by that vulture Makori." His fists tightened on the arms of his throne. "Tell me," he demanded, his tone rising, "which among you will ride to Zoruba and bring him home?" The room fell silent. Every general looked down. Even the bravest soldiers dared not meet his gaze. Zoruba was a kingdom of spears and cruelty, a place where even the wind seemed to carry danger. No one answered. The silence stretched so long that it seemed to echo through the marble pillars. Finally, the king turned his face away, his voice hollow. "Then it is true," he whispered. "I have soldiers with armor, but no men with hearts." From the edge of the hall, a voice rose quietly, firm but respectful. "My king," it said. The room turned to see Junad, his right arm still bandaged from the fight, standing with his head bowed. The king looked at him in disbelief. "Junad," he said, almost gently, "you have already given much. You were there. You bled. Why do you speak now?" Junad took a step forward, his face calm under the bright noon light. "Because, my king," he said, "no one else will. I cannot sit and eat while our prince suffers in a foreign land. I was his teacher, his guard, his friend. My hands failed to protect him once, but my spirit will not fail again." Murmurs rippled through the court. Some laughed under their breath. One general muttered, "A servant rescuing a prince? Foolish dream." But Junad did not flinch. He lifted his chin and said, "I am no warrior, but I have loyalty, and loyalty does not fear death." The king's eyes, weary and broken moments ago, now glimmered faintly. He stood slowly and descended from his throne, the sound of his sandals echoing softly on the marble. When he reached Junad, he placed a hand on the servant's shoulder and said, "You speak like a man who has already won half his battle." Then, after a pause, he looked toward the sky. "The gods hear you, Junad. Go. Bring back my son. And if you succeed, a Banji will forever speak your name. That same afternoon, the entire palace gathered in the courtyard to see Junad off. The sun hung high, bright and merciless, yet the light gave the moment a sacred weight. King Adwale stood before his people, his golden robe flowing in the hot wind. Behind him, the royal flag of a Banji waved proudly, green and red, symbolizing life and courage. The king raised his hand, and the drums beat again for the first time since the kidnapping, slow, heavy, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Junad stepped forward dressed simply, his clothes the color of earth, a small pouch of dried food hanging from his belt. No armor, no sword, only a wooden staff and his unbreakable resolve. The king said to him, "You travel as a servant, but you carry the honor of kings." Junad knelt, touched the dust with his fingers, and replied, "I go not as a hero, my king, but as a man who refuses to see a child in chains." The crowd bowed their heads in silence. Then, without fanfare, Junad rose, turned toward the open plains, and began walking, the hot wind lifting the dust behind him like a trail of fire. The people watched until his figure grew small, a lone man against the endless gold of the savannah. The journey was harsh from the very beginning. The sun scorched the earth, and each step raised clouds of heat that shimmered like water. Junad crossed farmlands first, where poor villagers recognized him and offered him water and prayers. "You go to Zoruba?" one old woman asked, her wrinkled hands trembling. "No one returns from there alive." Junad smiled faintly. "Then I must be the first." As he traveled further, the lands grew dry and empty. The rivers thinned into dusty beds, and the wind carried the cries of distant birds. He saw herds of gazelles running free, and once, a lion watching from a rock, golden eyes gleaming in the afternoon sun. Yet even nature seemed to respect him, nothing came close, as if the land itself knew his mission was sacred. By the third day, his lips cracked from thirst, but his spirit held strong. When he finally reached the border between Abanji and Zoruba, marked by great boulders and thorn bushes, he paused. The air smelled different there, heavier, sharper. He knew he was stepping into danger. Still, he took a deep breath, raised his head toward the bright blue sky, and whispered, "Ancestors, walk with me." Then he crossed. Zoruba greeted him not with kindness but suspicion. It was a land of smoke and stone, where soldiers patrolled even the roads between villages. The sun glared fiercely on their metal armor, making them look like walking flames. Junad had disguised himself as a spice trader, his small cart filled with salt and peppercorns he'd gathered from passing farmers. When the guards at the first checkpoint stopped him, he smiled politely and said, "I bring trade from the west, spices and salt for your markets." The guards checked his cart, found nothing threatening, and waved him through. From there, Junad traveled deeper into the heart of Zoruba, passing markets full of noise and color. But beneath the surface, the people's faces looked weary. Fear lived in their eyes. Even the laughter of children seemed forced. Everywhere he went, he heard one name spoken in dread, King Makori. The man ruled like a storm that never ended. His palace, Junad learned, stood on a high hill made of red earth, overlooking a courtyard where prisoners were often paraded as trophies. It was there, one farmer whispered, that the young prince of Abanji was being held. The news hit Junad like a spear to the chest. His hands trembled slightly as he thanked the farmer and walked away. "So the boy still lives," he murmured, "then hope still breathes." The walls of Zoruba's royal compound stood like the ribs of a sleeping beast, tall and sunburned under the blazing Nigerian sky. Junad crouched behind a cluster of thorny shrubs, the afternoon heat biting at his skin, his throat dry but his eyes sharp. For 2 days, he had followed the trail of Zoruba's soldiers, broken grass, hoofprints in the dust, and faint signs of struggle, all leading to this place. From his hiding spot, he could see the guards patrolling lazily, their bronze armor glinting in the sunlight, their laughter echoing across the courtyard. They believed the kingdom's walls and the cruelty of their king were enough to keep the world out. But they didn't know Junad. Behind his tired eyes burned the same fire that had pushed him across the wilderness, the promise he made beneath a Banji's sun, to bring the prince home or die trying. He waited until the shadows of the palm trees stretched long across the sand, and when the guards grew sluggish with the heat, Junad began to move. Every step was careful, silent, patient, the way a hunter moves when he stalks something sacred. As he slipped through the outer wall, Junad saw the true weight of Zoruba's cruelty. The marketplace was filled with silence, not joy. Farmers stood with empty baskets, women moved with lowered heads, and the air smelled not of spices but of fear. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if the kingdom itself held its breath under Makori's rule. In the center of the square, a tall wooden cage stood, not hidden, but displayed like a trophy. And inside it, under the harsh sun, sat Prince Kanu. His once bright clothes were torn, his face streaked with dust, but his eyes, those eyes that had always held the light of his father's kindness, still glowed with courage. Around him, the people of Zoruba passed by in silence, some turning their faces away, others bowing slightly as if they pitied him but dared not show it. Junad's heart clenched at the sight. For a moment, the years of loyalty, the days spent teaching Kanu to ride and laugh, all came rushing back. This was no ordinary boy. This was the spirit of a Banji itself, trapped behind wooden bars. Junad moved like a shadow through the crowd, his dusty robe blending in with the commoners. He reached the edge of the square, keeping his eyes fixed on the cage. Every second, he studied the guards' movements, when they looked away, when they switched positions, when they grew distracted by their own arrogance. He counted their breaths, their steps, the rhythm of their laughter. Then, as if fate itself had planned it, a commotion broke near the palace gate, a merchant's cart toppled over, scattering fruits across the sand. The guards turned instinctively, shouting orders. That was his moment. Junad slipped forward, heart pounding, his every muscle alive with purpose. He reached the cage, whispered softly, "My prince." The boy's head jerked up, eyes widening in disbelief. "Junad," he breathed. The servant smiled, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Quiet now, my prince. We go home today." With a small iron pin hidden in his sleeve, Junad began to work at the cage's lock. His fingers trembled, but not from fear, from urgency. Every second felt heavier than the last. The lock finally gave way with a soft click, and Junad gently pulled the door open. The prince hesitated, disbelief flickering across his face, but Junad's steady eyes gave him courage. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "And run when I say." They slipped through the crowd, heads low, moving toward the edge of the square. But luck is a fragile thing, and cruelty always senses hope. A shout rang out from the guards, "Stop them." Swords flashed, and chaos burst like thunder. Junad grabbed the prince's hand and ran, their feet kicking up clouds of dust. Through alleys, across courtyards, past startled villagers, the two figures raced toward the open desert beyond Zoruba's gate. The sun burned high above them, blinding and merciless, but freedom was within sight. Just as they neared the final wall, an arrow whistled past Junad's ear, grazing his shoulder. He stumbled, but didn't fall. Another arrow struck the sand beside Kanu's foot. The guards were gaining, shouting, their boots pounding against the earth. "Go!" Junad roared, pushing the prince ahead. "Don't look back." But the boy turned, tears mixing with sweat and dust. "I won't leave you." Junad's voice softened, even as pain twisted his face. "You must, my prince. You are the light of a Banji. Go." The prince hesitated only for a breath, then, with one last look, he ran. Junad turned, drawing the sword he had taken from a fallen guard, his body shaking but his eyes blazing with defiance. He fought like a man possessed, every swing born not of strength but of love. He cut through two soldiers before a spear caught his side, knocking him to the ground. The world blurred, the sunlight turning into a golden haze. But as he lay there, bleeding into the red dust, he saw the prince slip through the gates and vanish into the horizon. A faint smile touched Junad's lips. He had done it. The boy was free. When the Zoruban soldiers dragged Junad back into the square, their faces were red with rage. King Makori himself came down from his palace steps, his golden cloak gleaming like fire. "Who sent you, dog of a Banji?" he roared. Junad lifted his head slowly, his eyes calm despite the pain. "The sun sent me," he whispered. "The same sun that watches you burn." Makori struck him across the face, furious, but Junad did not flinch. The people watched in silence, their hearts trembling. Even they could see, this was no ordinary servant. This was a man carved from loyalty and light. Makori ordered him thrown into the dungeons, but it was too late to stop what had already begun. Beyond the walls, Prince Kanu was running, his heart pounding with grief and determination, every step carrying him closer to home. And as the sun blazed above Zoruba, even the air seemed to shimmer with a quiet truth, that courage, once awakened, cannot be caged. The golden plains of Nigeria stretched endlessly under the harsh sun as Prince Kanu ran barefoot across the open earth. His lungs burned, his throat was dry, and his small frame trembled with exhaustion, but he did not stop. Behind him, the echo of hooves still thundered faintly, a reminder of the chaos he had escaped. His heart beat not only with fear, but with the pain of what he had left behind. He could still see Junad's face, the calm courage in his eyes, the blood on his shoulder, the quiet strength that had bought him freedom. The sun blazed above him, reflecting on the sweat that rolled down his face, and yet, somehow, that light felt like Junad's spirit guiding him forward. The land before him shimmered like gold dust, and far ahead, beyond the line of acacia trees, the familiar hills of Abanji called to him like a promise. He stumbled several times, scraping his knees, but each time he rose again, whispering Junad's words to himself, "You are the light of Abanji." Those words became his heartbeat, his breath, his reason to keep going. By the time he reached the outskirts of his father's kingdom, the afternoon had softened into a warm, amber glow. Farmers working in the fields looked up in disbelief as the small, dust-covered boy came staggering toward them. For a moment, they could not believe their eyes, but then one old man dropped his hoe, his voice trembling with joy. "It's him," he cried. "The prince has returned." The news spread like fire across the plains. From the markets to the courtyards, from the wells to the palace gates, the people of Abanji ran out of their homes, tears streaming down their faces as they shouted his name. "Prince Kanu! Prince Kanu!" The royal guards came rushing down the road, their armor gleaming under the sun, and when they saw him, tired, wounded, but alive, they fell to their knees. Within minutes, the boy was carried back to the palace, surrounded by cheers, drums, and cries of gratitude. King Adwale was sitting beneath the royal fig tree when he heard the commotion. His weary eyes lifted, disbelieving, as the sound of drums grew louder. And then he saw him, his son, alive, running toward him with open arms. For a long moment, time itself seemed to stop. The king rose slowly, his face breaking into tears for the first time since the abduction. He rushed forward, embracing his son so tightly it was as if he feared the boy might vanish again. The courtyard erupted with cries of joy, the air filled with chants, laughter, and relief. But amid the celebration, King Adewale noticed something, the sadness in his son's eyes. When the cheers subsided, he knelt before him, gently lifting his chin. "My son," he said softly, "what troubles your heart?" The boy's voice quivered as he answered, "Father. Junad. He stayed behind. He saved me." The king's heart tightened. He looked at his generals, his ministers, his guards, all men of power, yet none had done what a humble servant had. He rose, his voice echoing through the courtyard. "Send word to Zoruba. Find Junad, dead or alive, and bring him home. No man who sheds blood for my house shall be forgotten." For 3 days, search parties rode across the borderlands, guided by footprints, tracks, and rumors. On the fourth afternoon, when the air shimmered with heat, a group of soldiers returned with a wooden cart draped in white cloth. The palace drums fell silent. The people gathered, their hearts heavy with both hope and fear. King Adwale walked forward slowly, his golden robe brushing against the marble floor, his hands trembling as he lifted the cloth. There, lying peacefully, was Junad, his face calm, his body still marked by battle, but his expression serene, almost smiling. In his right hand, clenched tightly, was a small charm, the same charm Prince Kofi had once given him as a boy, shaped like a sun. The king's eyes filled with tears, and he fell to his knees beside the body. He lived as a servant, he whispered, but he died as a savior. The people bowed their heads, the courtyard filled with silence. Even the wind seemed to stop, as if the world itself mourned him. At that moment, King Adwale made a vow. He stood, his voice strong and steady despite the sorrow in it. From this day forward, he declared, no act of courage shall go unseen. No man's heart shall be measured by his title, but by his loyalty. He turned to his ministers. Prepare the royal honor. Junad will be buried beside our ancestors, among kings. Gasps rose from the crowd. It was an unthinkable honor for a servant, but no one dared question it. The king continued, his tone fierce but filled with grace. And from this day, let his name be remembered not as a servant, but as Wazir Junad, the guardian of Abanji. The prince, tears glistening on his cheeks, took his father's hand and whispered, he will never be forgotten. Together, they laid Junad to rest beneath the royal fig tree, where the sun always shone and the breeze carried the scent of peace. The days that followed were bright once again. Life returned to the streets, laughter returned to the courtyards, and the drums of Abanji played songs of triumph instead of sorrow. But among all those songs, one melody remained, the story of a humble man who rose above fear, who crossed kingdoms, and who gave his life so that a prince could see another sunrise. Children grew up hearing his name. Elders told his tale beneath the wide afternoon skies. And every time the sun fell across the palace walls, casting golden light upon Junad's resting place, it felt as though his spirit still watched over the kingdom he had loved so deeply. Years passed, and the sun continued to shine brightly over the golden plains of Abanji. Time softened the kingdom's grief but never erased it. Under the endless afternoon skies, life blossomed again, traders filled the markets, drums echoed across the hills, and laughter once more danced in the palace courtyards. But even in joy, one name lived forever in the hearts of the people, Wazir Junad, the servant who became a legend. The story of his courage spread far beyond the borders of Abanji. Travelers carried it to distant villages, storytellers spoke his name beside the fire, and every child grew up hearing how one man's loyalty was stronger than fear. The royal fig tree beneath which he rested became a place of pilgrimage. People brought flowers, whispered prayers, and bowed before it not out of duty, but gratitude. His grave was never cold, the sun always touched it with warmth, as if nature itself refused to let his spirit fade. And though King Adwale had ruled wisely before, it was Junad's sacrifice that taught him what true leadership meant, to serve, not to be served. When Prince Kofi turned 18, the king began preparing him to rule. The boy had grown into a young man, tall, calm, and thoughtful, yet behind his eyes lived the memory of the man who had saved him. He often sat beneath Junad's fig tree, talking softly to the wind, as though still seeking his old teacher's guidance. Sometimes the gardeners would see him place his hand on the soil and smile faintly, whispering, "I still hear you, old friend." And when he trained with the generals, he fought with grace, never anger. When he judged disputes in the marketplace, he listened more than he spoke. When he walked among the farmers, he carried no crown, only a simple robe, so that his people could speak to him as one of their own. The spirit of Junad, humble, patient, fearless, had shaped him. He ruled not with the pride of royalty, but with the compassion of a servant. Even the elders said, "The boy carries two hearts, one of a king, and one of Junad." Under his watch, Abanji flourished. Rivers were redirected to feed the dry lands, schools were built for children, and no servant ever went hungry. And through it all, the young king kept one symbol close to his chest, the small sun-shaped charm Junad had held in his dying hand. He wore it not as an ornament, but as a reminder that even the brightest crowns are dim without humility. In the later years of his reign, King Kanu of Abanji became a legend across the continent. Kings sought his counsel, poets wrote songs in his name, and travelers came from faraway lands to witness a kingdom ruled by kindness. Yet, when asked where his wisdom came from, he never spoke of royal tutors or ancient scrolls. He would simply point to the great fig tree in the courtyard and say, "Everything I am began there." Under that tree, where the afternoon sun fell like molten gold, the king built a monument, not of marble or gold, but of simple red stone. At its center stood a sculpture of Junad, carved with his hands clasped and his eyes lifted toward the horizon. Beneath it were engraved words that would echo through generations, "He who serves with love rules with honor." Every year, on the day of Junad's sacrifice, the people gathered in the palace square, dressed in white, their hands carrying flowers. The king would lead them himself, walking barefoot, placing the first flower upon the grave, and saying aloud, "Abanji remembers." And as the drums played softly and the sunlight bathed the land, the people felt a quiet truth settle in their hearts, that greatness is not born from thrones, but from courage. Years turned into decades, and though time changed faces and crowns, Junad's legacy never dimmed. Children grew into parents and passed the tale onward, each version carrying the same heartbeat, a servant who became a savior, a man whose courage lit the path for kings. And so, long after both Adwale and Kanu were gone, long after Abanji had seen new rulers and new eras, the story remained alive, not just as a tale, but as a living law of the land. To this day, whenever the afternoon sun falls across the royal fig tree, casting long shadows over the palace, the people of Abanji still pause in silence. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear the soft voice of Junad in the wind, whispering the same words that saved a prince and shaped a kingdom: "The light of loyalty never dies."